I want to welcome you to tonight's event, How to Be a Better Ally in the Workplace with Brian Valentini, Monmouth grad from 2002 and moderated by Regina Johnson, Director of Multicultural Student Services and a Monmouth grad from 2001. We are so thrilled everybody can join us tonight. Before we begin, I'll cover those housekeeping items. The event is recorded tonight. It will be available on the Monmouth College website next week. For the best viewing experience during the presentation, please ensure you're on speaker mode, which can be selected in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Attendees can ask their questions using the chat feature on their screen, and we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. And we're also going to turn on everyone's cameras at the end, so you are welcome to ask questions directly. At the end of the event today, you'll see a short 3-minute survey appear in your web browser. So feel free to use this survey to offer your feedback, and we would love to have suggestions for future events. And I want to tell you a little bit about our presenters. So Brian Valentini studied business administration at Monmouth, graduating in 2002, and then he served for a year in the AmeriCorps. He spent his career in digital advertising, working his way through various digital marketing agencies, a journey that has taken him from Chicago to Boston and then back to Chicago again. He's currently an industry director for financial services at Microsoft. And during his career, Brian has learned a lot about allyship and what it means and takes to be an effective ally to all people. Regina Johnson, another Monmouth graduate, as I mentioned, from the class of 2001, majored in history with a minor in political science and secondary education with a middle school endorsement. So she was busy. Regina taught and coached for 5 years at Galesburg High School, and then she had an opportunity to work for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals as a sales representative, serving on the regional managed care key accounts team, and was a district product lead and led multicultural initiatives there. Regina earned numerous district, regional, and national sales top honors, including the Vice President's Cabinet Award for Outstanding Professional Sales. In 2016, Monmouth College was lucky enough to lure Regina back to campus to serve as our Director for Multicultural Student Services. So we are so excited to have you both with us tonight, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you. Regina, you're on mute.
I just realized that. I echo Jen's sentiments. Thank you everyone for joining with us this evening. I just want to make a few points. This webinar series is the first of several that we will be hosting this academic year as part of our initiatives, campus initiatives to support equity and diversify both our student base and our alumni base and get them more engaged. MENA, which stands for Monmouth Intercultural Network of Alumni, got its start in 2013 and has progressively gained momentum. That is an affinity space for our alums that identify with a marginalized identity. And so MENA has been pushing forward initiatives such as partnering with alumni, the development office, to bring you this webinar series. Our next one will be in November, and it will be DEI in education. But tonight, I'm very excited to have a former classmate, Brian Valentini, to lead us in a conversation about allyship in the workforce.
Thank you, Jen and Regina. Let me share my screen. Hold on a second. Okay, you all should see my screen. Really excited tonight to talk about allyship in the workplace, my journey, what it's meant to me, how I got here, and hopefully dive in afterwards with some questions. But for starters, a little bit about me. Some of it was already covered, but 2002 graduate. I started off in Windbigler, and then I moved to Graham. Then I was, I think, the last class that lived in Gibson, and then finally I ended up being the first class in Bowers. And I hope I didn't cause too much of a mess in there. I also was a little bit of a columnist for the school paper, writing about professional wrestling. Don't know if anyone read it, but that was my jam when I was in college. And then I also played football. Career, digital advertising, my whole career across a couple different ad agencies, a couple different cities. And I've been a people manager for the last 15 years, and currently I'm at Microsoft. On the personal side, my wife is also a graduate of Monmouth College. She graduated in 2003. We have 3 kids. We live right outside of Chicago. And in my spare time, I like to read, run, travel, listen to live music. This is a little bit about me from a personal, professional, and educational standpoint, but it's also a lot about me that is very privileged. And what I mean by that is I'm straight, cisgender, white, English speaking, college educated, able-bodied. I'm a naturalized citizen. And as I think about the privilege that I've had and the privilege that I do have and what it has meant to me and what it has meant to my journey, it's been very humbling, and I'll get into more of that, but it's been very humbling because I know that there's a lot of people who don't have the same amount of privilege that I do. And I want to talk about how I've used that privilege to be an effective ally in the workplace. But first, the story. In, I think it was 2018, there was a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. And there was a lot of people died. There was a lot of mean things that were said. It stirred up a lot of our nation's wrong racist history. And I remember I was talking to a coworker, and this coworker was Black. And I went to this coworker and I said, you know, all this stuff in the news, things that people are saying, like, I'm really sorry that this is happening to you. Like, I'm really sorry that this is happening to America, and that you're hearing this, and that you're hearing some of these words said about, you know, Black people. And I was like, okay, that was a good way for me to be an ally. Fast forward a couple of years, the news story about Ahmaud Arbery hit. And I remember I went to the same person and a couple other people, and I was just like, wow, like this is an awful story. I can't believe this happened. I can't believe this taken so long to get justice. This is awful. Like, I'm here for you. I support you. I really want to make sure that I'm available to you. I'll help you out in any way I can. And again, I thought that I was being a good ally. Fast forward again, and George Floyd hit. And again, I said, wow, this is awful. This is horrific. This is tragic. Like, I'm so sorry that, again, this another tragedy happened. Another tragedy affected your community. Like, this is awful. Like, I'm here for you. I support you. And this employee got very upset, and rightfully so, and didn't necessarily get mad at me, but drove home the point to me that this is real life. This isn't condolences. This isn't, oh, I'm here for you. This isn't, oh, like, how you doing? Like, you need a hug. This is real life. And this employee said to me, like, I fear for my life every day. If I go and have an interaction that, Brian, like you might have with your privilege, you don't have the same fears that I do. You don't have the same dangers that I do. And it's not just me. It's my friends. It's my family. It's my brother. And I was humbled by that. And I had to take a big step back in a big self-examination, because here I was thinking that I was doing the right thing. Here I was thinking that I was an ally. Here I was thinking that I was a friend. And I said, like, and I thought about it, and I was like, well, I'm not racist. I'm not like mean. I'm not bigoted. So like, I'm good. And that interaction and that conversation drove home 2 things for me. And the first is that being an ally isn't a sometimes thing. It's not just a, hey, I'm sorry this happened. It's not just a, wow, I can't believe that news story. Being an ally is always on. Being an ally is a verb, and it's something that happens through action, and it's something that happens through consistency, and it's something that happens when people show up and every day support, see, and take action that can help impact marginalized communities. The other thing that I learned was there are a lot of marginalized groups in my workplace and also in this country. So many times I had thought about marginalized people and marginalized groups really just coming down to race. But there are so many different layers and levels of different people who are marginalized or who are different groups who are impacted by social constructs, by policies, by historical policies, or by legacy things that might have happened to their family or that maybe couldn't have happened to their family because of the different marginalized groups that they belong to. And I really became to be aware of all the different marginalized groups that needed effective, impactful allyship, and that there were a lot of people and a lot of groups that I didn't see. And it wasn't because I was necessarily a bad person. It was because I didn't think that I had to necessarily see everybody, or I didn't think that if I wasn't impacted, if it didn't impact me, I was happy to go on my merry way. And when I really started to think about this allyship being an action, and that that there are marginalized groups all around me, some that I might not even be aware of, it really hit home for me that I needed to do more to be an ally, that I needed to do more to stand up and to help make the world a better place for the world, and also for my community, and also in my work. So I used the word privilege earlier, and the first thing I did as I embarked on this journey is I had to really become aware of my privilege. So many times in my day-to-day life, my thoughts are more consumed with what I don't have versus what I do have. And when I really started to think about the privilege that I had, a reason why I'm on this call today, like I was able to go to college. Part of that is privilege, and not everybody who lives in this country gets to go to college. I said earlier, like I'm English speaking. It was very easy for me to go to Monmouth because everything was in my language. I was from here. I was aware of the different like cultures, custom, traditions, really easy. And so I really dug in to my privilege and how it's benefited me, and how much of it I really had. And I love this slide right here. Becoming aware of privilege should not be viewed as a burden or source of guilt, but rather an opportunity to learn and be responsible so that we may work toward a more just and inclusive world. Because as I became aware of my privilege and started to really sit in it, my first reaction was to kind of push back against it. And again, maybe think a little bit about what I didn't have. Well, yeah, I might have some privilege, but I don't have it as well as that person, or I don't have as well as like that group. But then it really weighed on me, and the magnitude of it like did cause me to feel a little bit of guilt and a little bit of shame. Here I was born with a lot of privilege and born with a lot of things and opportunities and place in this world that not everyone else has that lives here. And so that caused me to feel a little bit guilty and a little bit shame about it. But then I really started thinking, and the more I thought about it, I kind of like flipped that script on its head and says, privilege doesn't have to be a static or a finite or a limited thing. And it doesn't have to be a thing that I had to carry around and just own it and just sit in it all by myself. I had the opportunity, and I do have the opportunity to give my privilege away, to help leverage and use the privilege that I have as currency to help others, to help make this world easier and better and more inclusive for others. Privilege, again, it did not have to be something that I had to wallow in or feel guilt about, as long as I used it, and as long as I used it to help make the world a better place and to give back and to be an ally to those in my community and to those in my workplace. So the first step that I had to do, this is a little bit relevant to our talk tonight from a college standpoint, is I had to learn, and probably said another way too, is I had to unlearn a lot of things. I had to really take the time to understand history, to understand social constructs, to understand all those different marginalized groups that are in this country and in my workplace, and also the different issues that impacted them. And I used to think, again, that, well, I went college educated, I've learned about things, I know about civil rights, I know about this and that, but then you start to really dig deep down and you're like, well, what do I know? Or from what lens and what perspective was it taught to me? And there were a lot of things where I had to be pliable instead of, like, I've always thought of things this one way, but what if there's a different way? Or what if somebody else has a different perspective? And that kind of light bulb went off, that, like, unlearning for me was more important sometimes than even the stuff that I've learned. And as I dug into it and really understood things, I understood that not everything was how I had always thought it was. And then again, there was history, and there has been policies, and there has been social constructs, and there has been overt and covert prejudice and discrimination across a wide range of marginalized groups. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was like an always on thing that for a lot of marginalized groups made this world a scary place, a hurtful place, a dangerous and even like an angry place, because it's not necessarily a lot of our society, unfortunately, is built for a smaller group or one group of people, and not sometimes built for everyone. So as I started to go on my journey, I wanted to share a few resources that really helped me. And the first are 3 books. How to be an anti-racist. And I said earlier, like, I used to think, like, I'm not racist, so, like, I'm fine. But that really doesn't, for me, address the challenges and the issues that are impacting people across different races. And I had to learn that it's more important to be an anti-racist and work against the social constructs and work against some of our norms that we have in society than to just be not racist. Also, a book called White Fragility. And again, like, one thing that it was hard for me to sometimes wrap my head around, because I had always thought of myself as a good person. Like, I didn't cause some of these problems. And maybe that's true, but more importantly, like, I had to use my space in this world to address, talk about, know, and understand those problems, and understand what it means for me to be white and for other people to be other colors. And then also a book called Covering, which talks a lot about those little things that we might not know about somebody, that they might not want us to know because they don't feel comfortable sharing with us. Like, maybe they are homosexual and they are afraid in the workplace that there will be repercussions if people know that. So they cover their religion, or they cover maybe a disability that they have. And so I took the time to dig into these books. And I'll say one thing about books is books can be long, and we are all short on time, but reading one book and really understanding it is better than 10 books that we maybe read 10 pages on. And also there's a lot of like YouTube videos or podcasts with these authors. Another thing that helped me, and I couldn't find the link for this presentation, but I had to do something for a class I was taking, is I listened to a podcast on Muslim spirituality. And I used to think that like Muslims and I had like nothing in common, with me coming from my Christian background. And as I heard this podcast, I was like, it sounds very similar to me. And the more I like listened to it and kind of like learn about the religion, I was like, not that different. But I had to kind of like come to that level through this type of education and through this resource. And the last thing that has really helped me is proximity. One of the slides earlier in my introduction slide for my family was us at a gay pride parade that we went to this past June. A year ago, maybe even 8 months ago, I would never have gone to a gay pride parade. I would have said like, it's awesome that they're having one, like, but I'm not gay, so why should I have to go? And putting myself in proximity and going and seeing what the support meant to that community, but also seeing like how much support that community needs, really inspired me and helped motivate me. And again, like proximity to any of these different like marginalized groups will help a lot from an educational standpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about taking action, but before I do talk about that, I want to talk about first things first. And so for sure, that foundational level of understanding, that foundational level of learning has to happen, but also there has to be awareness. And when I say that, I talked about the book Covering. There's a lot of people that I work with that I don't know their whole story. And an example of it is there's a woman on my team who's Muslim, and she's never really talked about it. She doesn't like talking about it, but there have been times before around the holidays where I've caught myself, hope you all have a good Christmas, have a good Christmas break. She'll for sure, take the holiday day off of work and not complain about it, but it's not super inclusive behavior to talk about Christmas when she doesn't celebrate that. And I have to be aware of that and be aware like, there's an actual reason why this day isn't important for her. And like, I have to be okay with that. But also be aware that there are different like holidays and different traditions and different cultural and societal norms that are important to her. And for me to make sure that I'm aware as possible of those different things that are important to her. And so after knowledge, after being aware, here's a couple tips for the workplace. Number one is employee resource groups. So, and I do work for Microsoft, which is an extremely large corporation. So we have a lot of people there, and part of that people gives us a lot of access to resources. And one of those is employee resource groups, which is to say like different groups that support different communities. So for example, I'm a part of the BAM Chicago, Blacks at Microsoft Chicago. I'm a part of that employee resource group. I'm a part of our LGBT group. We have a lot of different groups that support different marginalized communities. And whether if you're in the workplace, whether you're a big company or a small company, look out and look to either join or start an employee resource group. Another thing that's really important to allyship in the workplace is pipelining of diverse talent and making sure that as we hire and it's making sure as you interview candidates that we're not just like looking for people who are exactly like us or who have the same exact background as we all do. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about why that's important, but making sure that we have a good allyship is making sure that you're being as deliberate as possible when you're recruiting. Also, like, meet people. One of the things that's really helped me become an impactful ally in the workplace is making sure that I put myself out there. We all have tendencies, or I have a tendency to sometimes steer clear maybe of some people and to not necessarily do anything bad to them, but maybe just go out of my way to either avoid them or to not really know them. Allyship in the workplace is meeting people across a wide spectrum of differences and making sure that you're going out of your way to meet different, possibly marginalized groups in the workplace. And then finally, allyship in the workplace is if you see something, say something. I read a really sad stat the other day that I want to say it was like 75% of males wouldn't say anything in the workplace if another male made a derogatory comment about a female. And it was so sad that in 2021 that there's a culture maybe of locker room type of behavior, locker room kind of talk that's still tolerated in the workplace about fellow coworkers. And it's hard and it could be uncomfortable, but a big part of allyship is making sure that you're speaking up and speaking out whenever you notice some kind of slight or injustice against a fellow coworker in the workplace. We'll talk in a second about what effective allyship is not in the workplace, but I also want to make something like crystal clear that helped me. It wasn't any of my coworkers' job to teach me about social issues. And all too often in the workplace, as we think about being impactful allies, I've noticed that I've done this where I put then the burden on somebody from a marginalized group to tell me about that marginalized group. And it's not their job, and that's a big burden for them to carry. So I've had to take it upon myself to make myself aware of that tendency in myself and spend the time learning about the different social issues that are impacting that group. And being an effective ally for me was learning that on my own. And yes, asking questions to them for sure when it's relevant and appropriate, but not putting it on them to be the ones to educate me. Next, I want to talk a little bit about what allyship is not in the workplace and what bad allyship looks like. And the first is check a box. There's nothing worse than in life somebody being not genuine or not authentic. And it's even worse in the workplace when people are maybe doing something from an allyship standpoint only to check a box. Also, being defensive. I've had times where people have come to me and talked to me about a situation or a problem. And my first reaction was, I didn't mean it like that, or that's not what I said, or I didn't do that. It's wrong. Don't be defensive. It's not, for me, it was not a good moment of allyship by being defensive when I got feedback. Also, don't always try to necessarily fix problems, try to understand. There have been times when an employee came to me and said, I'm not feeling supported. And back to my last point, my first reaction was to be defensive and say, that's not true. But then my next reaction was like, okay, fine. If I can't get out of this by that way, here's how I'm gonna get out of this. Well, I'm just gonna go into fix it mode, solve it mode. And the feedback that I got was, I don't need you to fix this right now, or you can't fix this right now. Like sit here and listen to me, like seek first to like understand. And I realized at that moment when this person came to me, like they didn't want me to be defensive and they didn't want to even blame me and they didn't want me to fix or solve their problems. They wanted me to hear and understand their problems. And then finally, don't be afraid to make mistakes. because we are not all going to be perfect, and we're all not all going to get it right every time. And so a thing that I've noticed in the workplace where effective allyship is not, is when we try to either over-engineer or not do enough because we're scared, because we're timid, because we don't want to make a huge mistake. Again, we have to obviously like follow a lot of different rules and be empathetic and be professional, but we are going to make mistakes if we really dig hard into allyship. Now, some of the benefits of allyship. Create space for everyone. This world is big enough, the pie is big enough for everyone. We are all connected, we are all human beings, and the more that we can be good fellow citizens of this world, it's a better world for us all. Another benefit of allyship is empathy. Being empathetic in the workplace not only does something for ourselves, but it also, again, back to that space, it creates space for people to be themselves, to be real, to be genuine, and it makes it a really good place to work if there's a culture of empathy and a culture of understanding. And then finally, from a business standpoint, it's been proven by studies and research, and the data shows that diverse, inclusive teams where people can be themselves, where people can feel supported for how they are, end up being more higher producing, end up being more impactful, and usually end up getting better results than non-diverse and non-inclusive teams. And when we are all effective allies in the workplace, again, it makes whatever culture or whatever company or office that we're working in good, safe, fun for everyone, and other people want to be a part of it. So I'll talk quickly about what we do at Microsoft. We do a lot of training. Part of how I'm evaluated is how I help foster a diverse and inclusive and allyship centered workplace. We are extremely intentional about how we recruit and how we hire, and making sure that we aren't just looking for the same exact candidates, with the same exact background, with the same exact not cookie cutter approach to hiring, and really be cast a wide net across a lot of different parameters. We've also done a privilege walk before, where we all start on a line or one end of the room, and a moderator will start asking questions. Anyone who is a homeowner, take a step forward. Anyone whose parents were a homeowner, step forward. Anyone who's never had a scary altercation with the police or something like that, take a step forward. On the flip side, if the statement is not true for you, you have to take a step back. And by the end of the exercise, you look around and you're like, wow, like there's a lot of people who aren't standing next to me or in front of me, a lot of people standing behind me. And so the privilege walk is a really good way to, for us, to help kind of like activate some of that allyship and help people really see, okay, we need to be good allies because of this. I talked about like ERG, so we have a lot of different employee resource groups at Microsoft that span a lot of different marginalized groups. Part of these employee resource groups is do community calls. So we have different calls where we'll, people will dial in, they'll share stories, they'll ask questions, they'll talk about different news that's impacting those different employee resource groups in the marginalized communities. We also will go to or have like summits and conferences that specialize on allyship, that specialize on diversity and inclusion. And then finally, like we build diversity, inclusion, and allyship into our everyday conversations. I was in a meeting today, and half the meeting, roughly an hour-long meeting, roughly half of the meeting was spent discussing issues around diversity and inclusion. As I've gone on my journey and dug deep, it's done a lot for me. It's taken me from a standpoint where I used to say, like, this isn't my problem, this isn't my fight, to connected with the world, connected with the community, connected with my different coworkers across a spectrum of differences that we do have. I've also been able to change my view from being very narrow to one that is extremely aware, extremely open, and extremely inclusive, that there are other views, opinions, people, groups that aren't necessarily exactly like me, but again, like, we are all connected as human beings, and I become aware of those differences, and not as aware to maybe steer clear of them, but aware in a way to celebrate and embrace them. I've gone from somebody who is more on the fence, more passive around allyship, to being incredibly active with my allyship and looking for ways to continue being active. So in closing, I have a couple like go-dos that I want to share with y'all. And the first is, again, I talk about it again, but like, educate yourself. There are so many different ways that we can learn. It's not just books, but we have books, we have podcasts, we have articles, we have influencers or smart people that we can follow on Twitter or other social media. Like, take your time to really educate yourself on what you can do. Also, seek out somebody who's different than you. Seek out somebody who might have a different opinion of you than you. Seek out somebody who you might not ever have sought out before, or you might have avoided. Actively, like, and deliberately, intentionally, like, seek out different people than you. Ask questions. Again, it's on us as effective allies to do our own learning. That doesn't mean that we can't ask questions in a safe place along the way. So ask questions, and ask a lot of them. Again, like, if you're part of a workplace that is large enough, think about like joining in or starting an employee resource group. And finally, like, don't be afraid to fail, because I have failed, and you might fail, but failure is not something to be avoided. Again, we need to be respectful, and we need to put our best foot forward and have positive intent. But if we do that, like, being afraid of failure can sometimes limit really good action that can come of it. And I'll close with this comment from Brene Brown, because for me, like, effective allyship is really about like showing up, and sometimes showing our own vulnerabilities. So like what Brene Brown wrote, she said, daring greatly means the courage to be vulnerable. It means to show up and be seen, to ask for what you need, to talk about how you're feeling, and to have the hard conversations. And anytime we are effective allyship or allies in the workplace, we have to show up, and we do sometimes have to have some hard conversations, and some hard conversations maybe with ourselves, but also with others, but we'll be better for it. That is it. Thank you very much. And I think we're going to take some questions now.
Brian, thank you. I'm going to turn on some screens here. So doing that, you'll have a question that will say promote to panelist. So please accept that, and we will get some more people in the room. I think I have everyone. Hello. So I will just, if anyone has a question, please jump in.
I have a question. Hi, Brian. I'm Trudy Peterson. I teach in communication studies. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you for joining me.
Good. Yeah, I don't know if I ever had you in class or not. I don't know. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So would you have been ready to do some of this really hard work when you were an undergraduate? Because I'm trying to remember the curriculum back then. I think you had to take a course called Comparative Societies, but that was probably likely the only place in the curriculum where you would experience diversity, and unless you took a women's studies course or more of social classes. Would you have been ready to do this hard work?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
A book that I I didn't mention it, but I can't remember the exact name of it, but I think it's called like, why are all the Black kids sitting at one
Yeah.
table in the cafeteria?
Yes.
And that was my experience at Monmouth, but in high school too. And I think I would have, but I think it probably would it would have taken some time, I think, for it to like sink in and for me to really understand like the magnitude of the situation, and for me to understand like again, like growing up, I had always been taught, okay, like civil rights movement happened, like civil rights bills were passed, like life is good. And so it probably would have taken me some time to get over that, like, oh, life just isn't good part of it.
Hi, Brian. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
And I think you addressed this a little bit already, and I think kind of throughout the whole conversation, but in your opinion, what are other ways or more ways that allies can build trust, especially with people who might be more skeptical of their authenticity?
Yeah, good question. We're actually doing a BAM fireside chat at work for this next week. But I think a lot of it's around like positive intent both ways. So I think for people who want to be allies, it's to have positive intent and not just do it to like check the box, but be real and be authentic. And I was gonna say this, but I didn't say this earlier. It's like, you know, there's a lot of different like marginalized groups in this world, in my workplace. And for sure, I need to be respectful and aware and honor all those different groups. But there might be only a handful that I can actually genuinely like on an ongoing basis, like engage in. So I think making sure that I'm real authentic with the actions and the allyship that I do from a deliberate intentional standpoint. And then I also think it's, and I've had this conversation with, you know, people who are part of marginalized groups. It's like, it's hard, and it's hard in ways that I don't understand and I will never understand. But if somebody is showing up, do your best to give them the benefit of the doubt, as long as they haven't done something that's broken your trust. And you don't got to like open the floodgates from a trust standpoint, but it's like one step at a time.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brian, I'm Marnie. I'm the director of the Career and Leadership Center on campus.
Yeah, how you doing?
Great, and thank you for speaking. I really enjoyed your presentation. A couple of different points. I liked the point how you discussed how we can give our privilege away. That was a neat way to look at things that I had never really, you know, kind of taken that approach or thought of it that way. And also, when you talked about the employee resource groups and groups that support marginalized, you know, groups within an organization, as I'm helping students, say with the interview process, as they're prepping for interviewing for, you know, their job opportunities, what is some of the best way, or what advice would you give to a student on how to really learn about the culture of an organization and learn about what ways they can immediately jump in to support marginalized groups or be involved in some of those types of employee resource groups?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, and I can actually come at it from two different angles. So like right now I work for Microsoft, a huge corporation. And I think that's a very fair question that any candidate should be asking in the interview process is what kind of employee resource groups do you have? Like, what do you all do from a diversity and inclusion standpoint? You know, specifically, like, tell me about like what those groups are and what groups you have. I also think it's important for candidates to do their own research as much as they can, especially if it's a publicly traded company, because a lot of them do release reports where you can find out like what's the makeup of the company, like who are they hiring, what types of people, or even use LinkedIn, because you can scroll through pictures on LinkedIn, like look and see like, okay, like what are other of my coworkers looking like. But I would say like I started my career working at a 20-person like company, and it wasn't diverse at all. And it wasn't, even if we had diversity, like it wasn't like I mean, it wasn't a bad culture, but it wouldn't have been a culture that could have really probably understood that and embraced it. But I would tell them to ask in the interview process, like, can you tell me a little bit about what you would be willing to do from a employee resource group. What would you be willing to start? Has your company like given this any thought? And for some smaller companies, they might not get an answer that they want to hear, or they might not get a very good answer. And I would say maybe steer clear of that company, or just be super aware, like going into that company, that's not a big focus for that organization.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I'm a podcast person, and you mentioned podcasts, and that many of the authors of those books that you mentioned have podcasts. A lot of the podcasts that I listen to a couple women in career podcasts, and during the year they pivoted to more diverse content and what it's like to be a Black woman in the workplace. But do you have any recommendations of good podcasts, or does anyone else in the group that they listen to?
Rough Translation is a really good one.
Okay.
What was that again, Trudy?
Rough Translation.
Writing it down.
It's an NPR podcast.
Okay.
Race.
And a hack that I have is like, go to whatever podcast you have and just search for an author. And they might not have a podcast, but sometimes, oh yeah, Dare Lee is very good too. Rob put that in the chat.
Yeah.
But oftentimes if you just go to your podcast and just search for an author or search for a book title, you'll hear, because most authors have done a podcast to promote their book, even if it's on somebody else's podcast.
It's a good idea.
Emmanuel Acho, who wrote Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which Trudy and I will do later in the semester. That his series that he does to support that book is tremendous. And he brings some really, it's great dialogue. So that's another one.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, what a great presentation and conversation. So thank you so much, Brian and Regina, for being here tonight. Do you have any last words before we close out? And I'll do a little more housekeeping. Brian or Regina?
Thank you all. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate the questions and everything. So it's been a good time.
Brian, I appreciate you. Brian reached out to me. This initiated this summer. Obviously, we were classmates, and he knows my husband well. And he reached out via LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I see all of this good work you're doing at our alma mater. How can I give back and support?" And so I think that this is, thank you for making that reach out. I know we get to see each other every once in a while in passing, but this has been tremendous, and I appreciate you. I really do.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And I know we have a few people who didn't turn on their cameras, and that's great. But I want to just welcome everybody to more virtual events that we're going to have, like this one. You can find those on our website as we get those planned. We also are welcoming everyone back to campus for homecoming, October 22nd through 24th. Lots of outdoor activities. So I hope to see you all back on campus. I just see something in the chat from one of our alums. Well done, Brian. One of the best teammates I've ever had. No surprise, he's leading from the heart. So just love to close with that.
That's our fearless leader at the quarterback, Rob Pearl.
So that's great. And just please take that survey. Please give us suggestions for future content. Thanks to you both. Thanks for joining us and taking time out of your week. Have a wonderful week and good night.
Night.
Thank
Brian.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Great. I'm going to go ahead and close out. Thanks, Regina.
Yeah.